took long enough. You know, despite having based a few videos on them, I would only really describe myself as a casual fan of the Ninja Turtles. There's an irony in digging the initial conceptual idea behind it all which I've always been drawn to, but the franchise's history is more or less filled with a lot of stuff that's simply not very good, and often keeps me from allowing myself to get too invested in it all. That's not to say there hasn't been good material about the Turtles, just that by now there have been so many that the next one being good or not is not something I care to worry much about, and nor do I find it particularly relevant. The same is starting to become apparent for, I don't know, pick any fan favourite film franchise. There's an upsetting discussion to be had in finally accepting that Hollywood seems to think we live in an age of nostalgia instead of innovation, but yeah. As far as the Turtles are concerned, if one version sucks, well, there will always be another one just around the corner in a few years' time. With the arrival of the 2014 reboot, with the cast, crew, trailers, and posters attached to it, I associate this all with the experience of walking down the street and seeing some guy you know about to pass you, whom you don't actually want to stop and chat to. So you keep walking, maybe give him a smile, and let him pass. No harm done, you didn't bitch about it, and now it's over and done with. Going into this, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, to me, was the film encapsulation of that guy. It was always going to get rebooted eventually by someone along the lines of Michael Bay, who, funnily enough, turned out to executive produce instead with Jonathan Liebesman in the director's chair, and I elected to accept its existence and just let the thing pass. And after having seen this new reboot, which has been feared by many, and after its release, hated by millions or loved by a small few, turns out to be just another one. How about that? Now don't for one second think that that makes this a good movie. It's serviceable at best, and if I'm not being incredibly forgiving, then no, it's not very good. And while the biggest compliment I can give it is that it's better than the two sequels that followed the original, and I don't think there's any real need to bust out the old "they ruined Ninja Turtles" saying, since hasn't that kind of wore out its welcome at this point? There's still barely anything different or interesting done with the material here, and anything that does get added is either too crude, too boring, or way too unoriginal to make this anything other than just another Ninja Turtles flick. On the plus side, it's probably not going to stay with anyone for very long. I'm sure you've all heard the story by now. It follows pretty much every other pilot episode we've seen before. If you haven't, the plot concerns Megan Fox's April O'Neil, a reporter for Channel 6 seeking to be taken seriously in the world of media journalism, when she hears word of a militarised Foot Clan attack and purposely gets involved. Not to expose things like crime and corruption like in most of the other versions, but so that she can get the best news story. Our protagonist, ladies and gentlemen. Whilst doing this, she stumbles upon the heroes of the day, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and later on their master rat, Splinter. Meanwhile, it's revealed that Eric Sachs, a seemingly stand-up guy and billionaire, apparently worked with April's father in the past and is now working for the Shredder. Now with the news that these creatures are intervening in their affairs, the Foot Clan infiltrates the Turtles' home in the sewers and take all but Raphael back to their facilities where they hope to extrapolate their blood for generic villain plan number 65. It's mostly the same basic plot outline as always. April gets too nosy for her own good, sees our heroes, faints, they meet the Shredder and commence fighting. Only now, this isn't the first time that April has actually met the Turtles. I don't want to spoil what little there is to be revealed about it all, but have you seen The Amazing Spider-Man? Well, congratulations, you've already seen about half of what's in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Oh, and I have to ask, why of all the potentially good to rip off of movies did you choose this one? TMNT may possibly win the award for the most uninspired blockbuster script of the year, when it's not ripping off a film notorious for getting the key component to its hero's origin and reason for existing wrong, with its ridiculously insipid every character is coincidentally connected in some way backstory, which is the laziest form of establishing and developing interesting character dynamics, and one which only makes sense whereby April just suddenly remembers, hey, I used to know 4 mutated turtles, maybe these guys are the same. We're walking around with the dullest version of the character, the ugliest versions of these guys, and a really overly complicated plot involving Khan's Superblood from Star Trek Into Darkness, Megatron from Transformers, and the Falling Tower from the first Amazing Spider-Man. Wow. Entertainment wise, it's not necessarily boring per se. It adds about 500 other blades to the Shredder, a weird amount of random and frustrating jump scares, and throws in a lot of unremarkable action to keep the kids' attention spans going, but none of it is particularly interesting because the characters are so bland and non-existent that you've got no reason to care. You've seen this basic plot and these people done better way too many times before. Apparently someone at Paramount thought it would be cool to put Shrek in a giant shell and call him a Ninja Turtle. They look absolutely horrible. The new unnecessarily massive physiques don't do any favours with regards to the whole ninja element of their personas. Michelangelo in particular gives off a really disturbing pervert vibe for what is meant to be a kids movie, and besides one scene in an elevator which allows them all to breathe and share a laugh with the audience, the rest of the film is surprisingly unfunny. There is one moment where Raphael stands out as the one turtle that has to weapon up and go break the others out of the lab, and while I don't exactly want to give credit to the film for taking the time to focus on one of its 4 main characters for a short while, the voice actor does a good job and the character's probably going to wind up with the most fans. And while we're on the topic of relatively positive aspects for a minute, there is one really good scene involving the turtles in a car chase whilst going down a snow hill. It's fast-paced, light-hearted, rollercoaster ride fun. And while there is literally no explanation as to how they go from New York to this place and back again like it's a 20-minute trip to and from, it's an undeniably enjoyable popcorn action sequence and is the standout part of the film. It seems as though the outrage from fans has dictated certain rewrites in the middle of the production. The aliens idea was scrapped pretty early on, as most of us have already heard, and no, the fact that they reference it being a stupid idea in the actual film doesn't excuse it either, and Eric Sachs was clearly intended to be the Shredder at one point. I'm sure that the pre-viewing criticism and outcry from fans over the idea of putting a white American in the suit convinced them to shift things around. That I can roll with, but the problem is it's incredibly obvious. He gets bigged up as if he's this force to be reckoned with, but then turns out to be shooting a handgun in the finale with some other dude, whom we find nothing out about at all, in the Shredder suit. Besides that, the final showdown is pretty underwhelming, and it makes the fatal flaw in attempting to get April involved. Casting wise, I'm really worried for the next poor sod that decides to cast Megan Fox in his or her movie, because she's just awful in this. I mean, Jesus, you're meant to be looking at giant fighting turtles. Would it kill you to put more into your performance than simply looking as if someone just told a bad joke? The whole thing gives off that very same half-assed impression actually. Everyone is just doing it for the paycheck and there's not one sincere bone in its body. At the end of the day, I'd like to think that this more or less sits awkwardly in that bad but not bad enough category, where it won't necessarily rank among the worst films of the year, and will probably fade into obscurity, into that wide universe of Ninja Turtle incarnations that people will most likely forget, but no one's smiling about it either. It's unoriginal, it's horrendously lazy, it's nothing new. So there you have it. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles turned out to be just another one. Cheers for watching guys, and as always if you like this video, you can subscribe to my channel.